Marcus Aurelius. NTIL philosophers are kings, and the princes of this world have the spirit and power of philosophy, and political greatness and wisdom meet in one. Cities will never cease from ill, no, nor the human race, as I believe, and then only will our state have a possibility of life and see the light of day. The truth is that the state in which the rulers are most reluctant to govern is best and most quietly governed, and the state in which they are most willing is the worst. Thus writes Plato in his Republic, laying down the conditions, which even to him appear impossible, under which a state may be wisely governed. The ruler must be a philosopher as well as a king, and he must govern unwillingly, because he loves philosophy better than dominion. Once in the history of the world, these conditions were fulfilled. In Marcus Aurelius, we find the philosopher king, the ruler who preferred the solitude of the student to the splendor of the palace, the soldier who loved the arts of peace better than the glory of war. It is with no small interest that we turn to the records of history to see what was the outward life led by this king. But even more willingly do we open the precious record of his own thoughts, which reveal to us the inner life of the philosopher. Marcus Aurelius Antoninus was the adopted son of the Emperor Antoninus Pius, who died in 161 AD. He had been brought up with the utmost care by his adoptive father, and received the best instruction in poetry and rhetoric, at that time the staples of a liberal education. But his favorite study was philosophy, and when only 11 years old he assumed the philosophers' simple dress, adopted their mode of life. And finding that his inclination was chiefly toward Stoicism, he attached himself to this, the strictest of the philosophically schools. A discipline of monastic severity that bade its followers disregard all bodily comfort, all that is commonly called pleasure, and care for naught but virtue, was indeed a strange training for one destined for the imperial purple, and it hardly appeared to be a fitting preparation for the cares of what was then the one great empire of the world. True, the Stoics loved to call themselves citizens of the world, and to inculcate that cosmopolitanism that is broader and nobler than mere patriotism. But while they maintained in theory that the wise man should take part in politics, in practice, there was always something in the existing state of things which made his doing so unadvisable. But Marcus Aurelius could not choose his own lot. Destined for the throne already by the Emperor Hadrian, associated in the empire even in his adoptive father's lifetime, he could but accept his lot, and in striving to practice the noble principles he had learnt, pay to his Stoic teachers the truest tribute. His was a troubled reign. The Roman Empire, which in the vigorous days of the Republic had been gradually but surely extending its boundaries, had been consolidated and newly administered by Julius Caesar and Augustus. On the death of the latter, it extended from the Atlantic on the west to the Armenian mountains and Arabian deserts on the east. On the south, the African deserts had alone stopped the conquering arms, while on the north, a line of natural boundaries was traced by the English Channel, Rhine, Danube, Black Sea, and Mount Caucasus. Warned by the ill success that attended the later campaigns of his generals on the lower Rhine, Augustus had cautioned his successors to aim at preserving rather than increasing their dominions. Thus it came about that between the years 14 and 161 AD, when Marcus Aurelius succeeded to the throne, only two fresh conquests had been made. Britain, a source of more trouble than profit to the empire, and Dacia, conquered by Trajan in 106 AD. Natural boundaries and Roman legions kept peace and security for many years within the circle of Roman dominion. But there were two weak points on these borders. On the north, the hardy German tribes on the Danube and Upper Rhine, themselves hard pressed by Slavonian intruders from Russia, threatened to invade the Roman dominion. On the east, the insolent Parthian, long the terror of the Roman arms, was a constant source of trouble and danger. The peace-loving Marcus Aurelius was obliged to cope with both these enemies. The arms, or rather the army, of the insolent and profligate Lucius Verus for a time subdued the Parthians, but no lasting peace was destined Marcus Aurelius. He himself conducted the campaigns on the Danube, and again beat back the northern enemy in wars, of which the chief interest to us now consists in the scant notes in the Meditations. This among the Quadi, this at Carmentum, showing how these precious records of a pure and serene soul were composed amid the storms of battle and the elation of victory. Nor were his troubles confined to foreign wars. The plague, imported from the east, ravaged Italy, though it did the state good service in carrying off Lucius Verus, Marcus's adoptive brother, whom, in obedience to the wishes of Antoninus, he had associated with himself in the empire. There were famines too in the land, with which the emperor tried to cope by schemes of carefully organized charity. And lastly, Avidius Cassius, one of his most trusted and ablest generals, revolted in Syria and tried to obtain for himself the empire, deeming it an easy matter to overcome a master who was so full of generosity and compassion that he could only inspire contempt in the mind of the unphilosophic soldier. The revolt was soon put down, but the leader was killed by one of his own officers. The emperor expressed only his regret that he should have been thus deprived of the luxury of forgiveness, and he carefully destroyed all documents that could implicate any others in the revolt. Thus, in all the trials of his life, his philosophy inspired noble action, and he might worthwhile be added to the short list of those whom the Stoics acknowledged as really good and great. Amid these records of gentleness and forbearance, it seems strange to read that Marcus Aurelius permitted a cruel persecution of the Christians. Among the victims of this reign were Justin Martyr and Polycarp, and numbers suffered in a general persecution of the churches at Lyon and Vienne. It must not, however, be forgotten that the persecution was political rather than religious. Of the true teaching of Christianity, Marcus Aurelius knew little and cared less. But its followers, in refusing to acknowledge a religion which included the emperors among its deities, became rebels against the existing order of things and therein culpable. Of the old sincere belief in the gods of Rome, but little could survive in a state where the vote of the Senate had the power to add a new divinity to the already bewildering list. So much the more important were the outward forms, now that the actual belief was gone, and the bond between church and state grew even closer, now that the church could no longer stand alone. Of the various systems of philosophy at that time fashionable at Rome, all but the Epicurean could readily embody the creed of the old religion, and by treating the names of gods and heroes as mere symbols, they contrived to combine outward conformity with inner enlightenment. Not so the Christians. In their eyes, the whole system of idolatry was accursed. A silent protest was insufficient. It was not enough to refrain from sacrifice themselves. In public and in private, in season and out of season, they exhorted others to do the like. Not content with leaving the statues of the gods unhonored, they would throw them from their pedestals or insult them in the presence of the faithful. What wonder that the Romans looked on them with suspicion and hatred, and added to their real offenses the pretended ones of eating human flesh and indulging in all manner of immorality. In our own more enlightened day, we know what strange reports gather round any sect or school that happens to be unfashionable or unpopular. What wonder, then, that the secret meetings of the Christians should have given rise to strange rumors, and that the persecutions were the expression of a feeling with which a modern state might regard a set of men who were at once Mormons and nihilists. Add to this that the Christians often actually provoked persecution, and we cease to wonder, though we cannot but regret, that Marcus Aurelius, in simply allowing the law to take its course, should have failed to give an example of that perfect toleration to which Christianity itself has never yet attained. Let us be content to call him, with Ferrar, the noblest of pagan emperors, and sorrowfully acknowledge that we must seek in vain for a Christian monarch to place beside him. Wars and troubles attended Marcus Aurelius to the very end of his days. In 177 AD, fresh wars called him to the north. A presentiment seemed to tell his friends at Rome that they should not see him again, and they begged him to address them his farewell admonitions. There is nothing more striking in the whole of Aurelius' career than this picture of the great general discoursing for 3 days before his departure for the wars on the deep questions of philosophy. This was indeed the last time he was seen at Rome. Worn out by anxiety and fatigue, after once more winning victory for the Roman arms, he died in Pannonia on March 17, 180 AD, mourned with a note of such true sorrow as never before or again was raised at the death of an emperor. It is time to inquire into the nature of that philosophy, which was capable of exercising an influence so distinctly practical. Yet, when we consider its teaching as laid down by its founders, Its distinct materialism and impracticable ethics afford little suggestion of such fruits as it was destined to bear in the Roman world. The Stoic school was founded by Zeno at Athens about 290 BC. At this time, Greek philosophy, which, under Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, had lived through a short period of idealism, was returning to its naturally materialistic groove, and the founders of new systems looked back to the pre-Socratic physicists for some theory of the universe on which they might base their own. Metaphysical speculation had ceased to charm. It was practical ethics, a rule of life and conduct, that philosophy now desired to supply. And though these later schools based ethics on natural science, they were content to go back to the investigators of old for a system, instead of devoting themselves on their own account to scientific research. The two most important schools at this epoch were the Stoic and Epicurean. And while the latter sought in the atomic theory of Democritus an explanation of the universe, the former reverted to the perpetual flux, the eternal, ever-changing fire of Heraclitus. Before there was a heaven or earth, there was a primitive fiery ether. This changes into all the other elements, and yet in its nature ever retains the fiery substratum. First, this fiery ether transforms itself into a mass of vapor, then into a watery fluid. Out of this are developed the four elements as we know them: water and solid earth and atmospheric air, and lastly consuming, destructive fire, which is distinct from the everlasting ether. Fire and air are active elements, water and earth, passive. The creation begins to assume its present form with earth. Dry earth, by reason of its weight, takes up a position at the center of the universe. Around it gather the waters. Above both is the expanse of air, while fire and ether complete the whole, ever circling round the other elements which are at rest. The stars are fiery masses firmly embedded in ether and nourished by the exhalations of terrestrial vapors. But they are also living beings, since they are formed out of living, animating fire, and they may thus be regarded as inferior or visible gods. The sun and the celestial deities, too, have their business assigned, says Marcus Aurelius. The world is faultless, say the Stoics, and must therefore have been produced by an intelligent artificer. Hence, the highest reason is immanent in the world, and must be regarded as self-conscious and personal. For has it not created man, who is self-conscious and personal, and can the created be greater than the creator? And yet, paradoxical as it may seem, the Stoic God is not a person, but is the fiery ether that pervades all things. This fiery substratum of all matter is its soul. The soul of the universe, which holds together all things in one fixed law, is God himself. In one aspect the deity is but a fiery air current. In another he is Zeus, the intelligent, almost personal lord of the universe. Both these aspects may be found in Marcus Aurelius. But in him, the simpler ethical teaching, the gentle exhortation to a virtuous life, predominate over subtle speculation on the origin of things, and bespeaks of God in language that suggests vividly to us the omnipotent, omniscient deity of monotheism. The Stoics traced back all things to formless matter and the informing, animating ether. Matter was in its nature eternal, since the underlying fire was imperishable, but all things were being gradually consumed, and at the end of a fixed period, there would be a general conflagration, when all things should be reabsorbed into the deity. Then once more they would be developed afresh, and another cycle begin. The world's great age begins anew, the golden days return, the earth doth like a snake renew her winter weeds outworn, sings Shelley, but the Stoics expected no brighter Hellas, or fairer Tempes. The new things should be but as the old. In the new cycle there should be another Socrates, destined to marry another Xanthippe, and meet with the same rough treatment at her hands, and finally to be accused by Anytus and Meletus, and once more utter his glorious defense, and drain the cup of hemlock among his sorrowing disciples. Some such scheme of the universe was certainly accepted by all the Stoics, but the later teachers, at any rate, attached little importance to it, except in as far as it demonstrated man's intimate connection with the deity and his fellowmen. They believed that the soul was material and extended in space. It is the fiery current that is diffused through the body and holds it together. They regarded it as the guiding or dominant principle, the indestructible divine spark. It is this, the reasoning element, which establishes the relationship between God, the universal reason, and man, to whose lot has fallen a minute share of it. While the brotherhood of man is maintained in virtue of a kinship, not of flesh and blood, but of mind and reason. Though we are not just of the same flesh and blood, yet our minds are nearly related. Marcus Aurelius med. 2:1 Did the Stoics believe in a life after death? It is not easy to decide. They did not, like the Epicureans, fiercely deny it, maintaining that annihilation alone could remove the terrors of death. Undoubtedly, the individual soul must at last be absorbed into the universal soul, but whether this happened at once, or not until the next configuration, was a point on which authorities were not agreed. In any case, the soul must return to the deity whence it sprang. This relation to the deity was the fundamental point of Stoic ethics. It follows from the kinship that man's true good must lie in conformity with the deity. But God and reason are identical. Therefore, life in accordance with reason must be best suited to the constitution of the soul, and such a life must be in accordance with virtue. Hence, this is the highest good, and happiness consists in virtue. Thus, the Stoics arrive at their main thesis. Virtue alone is admirable, virtue is absolutely self-sufficient. The good man needs no help from circumstances, neither sickness nor adversity can harm him. He is a king, a god among men. All so-called good, if it be not moral good, is included in the class of things intermediate, neither good nor bad. Such absolute claims for virtue had never before been made by any school. Aristotle had stipulated for sufficient external advantages to enable a man to devote himself without further care to the life of thought and virtue. The Stoics would permit of no such compromise. Virtue and virtue only was what they demanded. The virtuous man might be a slave, a victim to disease, to poverty, might be deprived of all he loved, yet he would remain solely and absolutely happy. Virtue was one and indivisible. Whoever was not virtuous was vicious. There was no middle course. Here was a point in their doctrine which could hardly be made to square with fact. We know too well that men are not divided into virtuous and vicious, but all possess some share of good and evil, and that most men desire what is right, and fail, when they do, from weakness rather than viciousness. The Stoics, who demanded absolute virtue and disregard of externals, had to confess that the wise men were few and the foolish legion. Nay, when hard-pressed to name their wise men, they would give a remarkable list. Hercules, Odysseus, Socrates, the cynics Antisthenes and Diogenes, and in the later days of the school, Cato the Younger, the only Stoic among the number. Such a list alone appears to us sufficient condemnation of Stoicism in its earlier forms. Had no further advance been made, Stoicism would be of small interest to us now, but happily it was destined, as Capes remarks in his little handbook on Stoicism, to be tempered by concessions to common sense. The paradoxes about the wise man had been borrowed from cynicism, which was regarded by the Stoics as a counsel of perfection. Diogenes in his tub, bidding Alexander stand out of his sunshine, might excite surprise and wonder. But a movement that should lead a whole community to abandon civilization and resort to life in tubs would be distinctly retrogressive. In later times, Christian hermits have at best saved their own souls, and the exhortations delivered by St. Simeon Stylites from the top of his pillar cannot have influenced the gaping multitude as much as a noble life led in their midst. Without the practical element, there would have been no life in Christianity, and Stoicism similarly had to descend from its pedestal and walk among men. First of all, the theory of absolute good and evil had to be modified. Virtue was still the only real good, and vice the only real evil. But besides these, they now admitted a class of things to be preferred, and another of things to be avoided. Among the former might be included health, good repute, and other advantages which had formerly been summarily disposed of as indifferent. Again, while the impossible wise man still remained the ideal of Stoicism, it was admitted that there might be good men with lofty aims and blameless lives who should yet dwell among men as their fellows. In short, the wide gap between the sage and the fool was now filled up, and as a result, the Stoic system was able to find a place for real, existing human beings. These more practical developments were coincident with its introduction into the Roman world. The Romans were nothing if not practical. A nation of soldiers and lawyers, they had borrowed from Greece her culture, and adapted it to their own needs. So too, they borrowed their philosophy. When conquered Greece led her barbarous conqueror captive, a few of the nobler minds at Rome discovered that there was something at Athens worth carrying off besides the statues. Some would spend a year or two at Athens studying philosophy. Others induced the greatest teachers themselves to bring their doctrines to Rome. And in the 1st century BC, all the Greek systems were represented in the capital of the world. Among them, all Stoicism found most adherents. Its teachings of simplicity, resignation, and calm in the midst of disturbance found willing listeners among the earnest republicans, who saw their hopes of liberty gradually fading before the approaching monarchy. Its doctrine that suicide was admissible, even admirable, when circumstances made it no longer possible to take R as against a sea of troubles, pointed to a mode of escape from the tyranny they could not avert. Thus Cato sought death at his own hands when the Republic perished, and it was Stoic teaching that forbade Brutus and Cassius, though not Stoics themselves, to survive the Battle of Philippi. In the early days of the empire, when corruption and license were at their height, the court evinced deep hatred against the philosophers, more especially the Stoics. The outspoken manner in which they chastised the wickedness of the time may have led to their unpopularity. In any case, there were several decrees of banishment against them, and among the victims at one time was that halting slave, who in Nicopolis taught Arrian when Vespasian's brutal son cleared Rome of what most shamed him. Well might the name of Epictetus be counted among those who cheer the soul in evil days, for where can sweeter resignation or truer piety be found than in such words as these? Dare to look up to God and say, "Deal with me for the future as thou wilt, I am of the same mind as thou art. I am thine, I refuse nothing that pleases thee. Lead me where thou wilt. Clothe me in any dress thou choosest. Is it thy will that I should hold the office of a magistrate, that I should be in the condition of a private man, stay here or be in exile, be poor, be rich? I will make thy defense to men in behalf of all these conditions." These were not empty words, for they found their illustration in the life of the speaker. In the lame slave, Stoic ethics rose to its noblest heights, but it was left to the imperial philosopher, by broadening and humanizing its teaching, to give to the world in his meditations the gospel of those who do not believe in the supernatural. These meditations were not written as a whole, probably they were never intended for publication. They are simply the emperor's commonplace book, where he entered his reflections, often quite unconnected, on the things of time and eternity. By this means, he seems to have adopted his own counsel of withdrawing into his own mind, there to seek calm and quiet. It is noteworthy that in Marcus Aurelius, the claims of natural affection are never disregarded. Book 1 is entirely devoted to recording his obligation to his parents, friends, and teachers for the benefit of good training or example. For all those helps and advantages which can be traced to none of these, he simply thanks the gods, without further discussion or inquiry into their nature. The same loving disposition gives life to the Stoic doctrine of the citizenship of the world. Marcus Aurelius truly finds himself akin to all mankind. Mankind are under one common law, and if so, they must be fellow citizens and belong to the same body politic. From whence it will follow that the whole world is but one commonwealth, med. 4:4. Now a social temper is that which man was principally designed for, 755. This brotherhood of man will lead us to strive for the common good, and reckon nothing else our own advantage. That which is not for the interest of the whole swarm is not for the interest of a single bee, 654. It will lead us also to pity and forgive our enemies. And since it has fallen to my share to understand the natural beauty of a good action and the deformity of an ill one, since I am satisfied the person disobliging is of kin to me, and though we are not just of the same flesh and blood, yet our minds are nearly related, being both extracted from the deity, I am convinced that no man can do a real injury, because no man can force me to misbehave myself. Nor can I find it in my heart to hate or be angry with one of my own nature and family. For we are all made for mutual assistance, as the feet, the hands, and the eyelids, as the rows of the upper and under teeth, 2:1. Marcus Aurelius loves to dwell on the instability and insignificance of all things. The vast continents of Europe and Asia are but corners of the creation, the ocean is but a drop, and Mount Athos but a grain in respect of the universe, and the present instant of time but a point to the extent of eternity. These things have all of them little, changeable, and transitory beings. 636. We should accustom ourselves to watch the eternal course of destruction and realize that the universe itself sustains no harm. The death of one thing is the birth of another. The universal nature works the universal matter like wax. Now, for the purpose, it is a horse. Soon after you will have it melted down and run it into the figure of a tree, then a man, then something else. And it is but a little while that it is fixed in one species. Now a trunk feels no more pain by being knocked in pieces than when it was first put together. 723. Death and generation are both mysteries of nature, and somewhat resemble each other. For the first does but dissolve those elements the latter had combined. 4-5. Amid all this change, the only true good is philosophy, which teaches us to keep our guiding principles pure and untainted by bodily impressions. Toss me into what climate or state you please. For all that, I will keep my divine part content if it but exist and act in accordance with its nature. 845. Nothing external can influence us unless we pronounce it good or evil. This is in accordance with the Stoic doctrine that all sensations make a material impression on the soul, but it is left to the reasoning or guiding principle to decide whether they are true or false, good or evil. Hold in honor your opinionative faculty, for this alone is able to prevent any opinion from originating in your guiding principle that is contrary to nature or the proper constitution of a rational creature. 3-9. Do not suppose you are hurt, and your complaint ceases. Cease your complaint, and you are not hurt. 4-7, writes the emperor, using, as he so often does, an obscure dogma to point a practical moral. Such practical teaching abounds in Marcus Aurelius, but he rises to higher flights. How gladly he quotes Antisthenes' comment on the kingly prerogative. It is a royal thing to be ill spoken of for good deeds. 736. How well he satirizes the craving for gratitude, so aptly defined by a French writer as the usury we exact for our good deeds. Some men, when they do you a kindness, at once demand the payment of gratitude from you. Others are more modest than this. However, they remember the favor and look upon you as their debtor in a manner. A third sort shall scarce know what they have done. These are much like a vine, which is satisfied by being fruitful in its kind, and bears a bunch of grapes without expecting any thanks for it. A fleet horse or greyhound do not make a noise when they have done well, nor a bee neither when she has made a little honey. And thus a man that has done a kindness never proclaims it, but does another as soon as he can, just like a vine that bears again the next season. Now we should imitate those who are so obliging as hardly to reflect on their beneficence. 5-6. And how scathing is this criticism of the affection of virtue? How fulsome and hollow does that man look that cries, I am resolved to deal straightforwardly with you. Hark you, friend, what need of all this flourish? Let your actions speak, your face ought to vouch for your speech. I would have virtue look out of the eye, no less apparently than love does in the sight of the beloved. I would have honesty and sincerity so incorporated with the constitution that it should be discoverable by the senses. 1115. Here is another gem that sparkles with a special brightness. The best way of revenge is not to imitate the injury. 6-6. User text, very noble is this conception of the true function of prayer. This man invokes the gods to set him free from some trouble. Let it be your petition that your mind may never put you upon such a wish. A third is very devout to prevent the loss of his son. But I would have you pray rather against the fear of losing him. Let this be the rule for your devotions. 940. To quote from the Meditations is a tempting task, but they lie before the reader, and he can make his own choice. We must, however, briefly inquire how Marcus Aurelius treats those great questions to which each system must find some answer, or else abandon its claims to be a guide through life. The origin of evil is a difficulty that every system has had to meet. It is the first and most obvious argument against the existence of an always providence. The Stoics boldly faced the difficulty and denied the facts. The world is perfect, they said. All that seems evil is required for the general good. On this point, Marcus Aurelius is perfectly orthodox, but he condemns too curious inquiry. Does your cucumber taste bitter? Let it alone. Are there brambles in your way? Avoid them then. Thus far you are well. But then do not ask, what does the world with such things as this? For a natural philosopher would laugh at you. This expostulation is just as wise as it would be to find fault with a carpenter for having sawdust or a tailor shreds in his shop. Epictetus had said, As a mark is not set up for the purpose of missing it, so neither does the nature of evil exist in the universe. That is, there is no absolute evil, it is all subordinated to good. So too Marcus Aurelius. Wickedness generally does no harm to the universe. So too in particular subjects it does no harm to anyone. 855. At times he points not to the universal law, which he regards as the providence of the universe, but to the existence of gods, who must direct all things for the best. But he never asserts this with any certainty. The alternative is between gods and atoms, between providence and chance, and though Marcus Aurelius pronounces for the former, he desires to show that even under the latter, a man may be content. As to the future life, he never speaks with any certainty. The guiding principle of the soul can never perish, since it is a part of the deity, but whether there is a future self-conscious existence is a question he scarcely touches on. This life is all that concerns us. Though you were destined to live 3,000, or, if you please, 30,000 years, yet remember that no man can lose any other life than that which he lives now, neither is he possessed of any other than that which he loses. 214. The Stoic emperor cannot say with our modern poet, "What is our failure here but a triumph's evidence for the fullness of the days? Have we withered or agonized? Why else was the pause prolonged, but that singing might issue thence? Why rush the discords in, but that harmony might be prized?" But he draws a noble moral from the transistoriness of our being. Not "let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die," is the teachings of the Meditations, but rather, "let us use this life well, since we have no other." The consolation for death must be sought in the consciousness of duty done. If we have lived well, we should be content to die, no matter whether our years be many or few. Epicurus bade his followers depart from life as a guest from a banquet satisfied with his entertainment. The Stoics, in sterner language, bid us leave the stage as an actor who has performed his part. Hark ye, friend, you have been a burgher of this great city. What matter whether you have lived in it but 5 years or 3? If you have observed the laws of the corporation, the length or shortness of the time makes no difference. Where is the hardship, then, if nature, that planted you here, orders your removal? You cannot say you are sent off by a tyrant or an unjust judge. No, you quit the stage as fairly as a player does that has his discharge from the master of the revels. But I have only gone through 3 acts, and not held out till the end of the 5th, you say. Well, but in life 3 acts make the play entire. He that ordered the first scene now gives the sign for shutting up the last. You are neither accountable for one nor the other. Therefore, retire well satisfied, for he by whom you are dismissed is satisfied also. 12:36. The lovers of Marcus Aurelius have been many, and of every shade of opinion. Long quotes from the preface to Piran's translation. A man illustrious in the church, the Cardinal Francis Barberini the Elder, nephew of Pope Urban VIII, occupied the last years of his life in translating into his native language the thoughts of the Roman emperor, in order to diffuse among the faithful the fertilizing and vivifying seeds. He dedicated this translation to his soul, in order to make it, as he says, redder than his purple at the sight of the virtues of this Gentile. Montesquieu says of Marcus Aurelius, "On sent en soimimon ciel sur secret lorsk, on parle de si impor, on niput dire savai sans una spes detendissement. Tel est elefit quil, produit quan ailer opinion de soimerm pars quan ailer opinion des homs." Matthew Arnold, in his essays in criticism, points out with his usual clearness the reason of this popularity. It is remarkable how little of a merely local or temporary character, how little of those scorus, which a reader has to clear away before he gets to the precious ore, how little that even admits of doubt and question, the morality of Marcus Aurelius exhibits. In general, the action Marcus Aurelius prescribes is action which every sound nature must recognize as right, and the motives he assigns are motives which every clear reason must recognize as valid. And so, he remains the special friend and comforter of all clear-headed and scrupulous, yet pure and upward-striving souls, in those ages most especially which walk by sight and not by faith, and yet have no open vision. He cannot give such souls, perhaps, all they yearn for, but he gives them much, and what he gives them they can receive. Perhaps there never was an age that more needed such teaching than our own. On one hand, sectarian hatred and dogmatism almost obscure the great truths common to all mankind. On the other, Merciless and destructive criticism, in undermining much that used to be generally accepted, seems at times to threaten even the foundations of truth. Here we may turn, as Renan bids us, to the absolute religion of the Meditations. La religion de Marc Aurel est la religion absolue, celle qui résulte du simple fait d'une haute conscience morale placée en face de l'univers. Elens est d'aucune race ni d'aucun pays. Aucune révolution, aucune changement, aucune découverte, ni pourant la changer. The Meditations are chiefly known to English readers in Long's translation, a most scholarly work, and remarkable for its perfect fidelity to the original. Its one defect is a certain lack of vigor, though it must be confessed that the original too is defective in point of style and finish. Before this appeared, the best-known translation was Jeremy Collier's, a book with a charm all its own, in fact, a version far more spirited than the original. Greek scholars must always delight in Long's perfect accuracy, but Collier's work has a value of its own. Jeremy Collier, too, observes Matthew Arnold, like Mr. Long, regarded in Marcus Aurelius the living moralist, and not the dead classic, and his warmth of feeling gave to his style an impetuosity and rhythm which, from Mr. Long's style, I do not blame him on that account, are absent. Long had found fault with Collier's translation as coarse and vulgar. Mr. Arnold objects. Jeremy Collier's real defect as a translator is not his coarseness and vulgarity, but his imperfect acquaintance with Greek. An attempt is here made to offer to the reader a corrected, though I dare not say a correct, version of Collier's translation. The general scheme of his work has been left unaltered, but gross errors have been corrected, and modern expressions substituted for others that have grown obsolete. In a few cases, where the translator seemed to have entirely misapprehended the meaning, short passages have been rewritten. In this work, Long's translation and a German version by Kless have afforded me invaluable help, and in some cases I have made use of a very charming, though antiquated, 17th century translation by Marek Kasabin. In revising Book 4, I have used Crossley's most helpful notes. My warm thanks are due to Mr. R. D. Hicks and Mr. E. V. Arnold of Trinity College, Cambridge, and to Mr. R. Garnett of the British Museum, for valuable help in this work and in the correction of proofs.
Image summary. The image shows an artistic rendition of the letter U, which is part of a quote from Plato's Republic. The quote discusses the ideal conditions for a well-governed state, where rulers are philosophers who reluctantly govern due to their love for philosophy. The text suggests that such conditions were met in Marcus Aurelius, portraying him as a philosopher king who favored solitude and peace over worldly grandeur and war. Image summary. The image is a full page with no content. It is likely a blank page, possibly at the beginning or end of a book.
Book I. The Emperor Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. His Meditations, or Discours with himself.
Image summary. This is an image of a plain page. The page is blank. There is no information to be inferred.
Book I. 1. He example of my grandfather Varus gave me a good disposition, not prone to anger. 2. By the recollection of my father's character, I learned to be both modest and manly. 3. As for my mother, she taught me to have regard for religion, to be generous and open-handed, and not only to forbear from doing anybody an ill turn, but not so much as to endure the thought of it. By her, likewise I was bred to a plain, inexpensive way of living, very different from the common luxury of the rich. For I have to thank my great-grandfather that I did not go to a public school, but had good masters at home, and learnt to know that one ought to spend liberally on such things. 5. From my governor I learned not to join either the green or the blue faction on the race ground, nor to support the Parmularius or Scutarius at the gladiators' shows. He taught me also to put my own hand to business upon occasion, to endure hardship and fatigues, and to throw the necessities of nature into a little compass, that I ought not to meddle with other people's business, nor be easy in giving credit to informers. 6. From Diognetus, to shun vain pursuits, not to be led away with the impostures of wizards and soothsayers, who pretend they can discharge evil spirits, and do strange feats by the strength of a charm, not to keep quails for the pit, nor to be eager after any such thing. This Diognetus taught me to bear freedom and plain dealing in others, and apply myself to philosophy. He also procured me the instruction of Bacchius, Tandaces, and Martianus. He likewise put me upon improving myself by writing dialogues when I was a boy, prevailed with me to prefer a couch covered with hides to a bed of state, and reconciled me to other like rigors of the Grecian discipline. 7. It was Rusticus that first made me desire to live rightly and come to a better state, who prevented me from running into the vanity of the sophists, either by writing speculative treatises, haranguing upon moral subjects, or making a fantastical appearance or display of generosity or discipline. This philosopher kept me from yielding to the charms of rhetoric and poetry, from affecting the character of a man of pleasantry, from wearing my senator's robe in the house, or anything of this kind which looks like conceit and affection. He taught me to write letters in a plain, unornamental style, like that dated by him from Sinusa to my mother. By his instructions, I was persuaded to be easily reconciled to those who had misbehaved themselves and disobliged me, as soon as they desired reconciliation. And of the same master, I learned to read an author carefully, not to take up with a superficial view or assent quickly to idle talkers. And to conclude with him, he gave me his own copy of Epictetus's Memoirs. 8. Apollonius taught me to give my mind its due freedom and disengage it from dependence upon chance, and not to regard, though ever so little, anything uncountenanced by reason. To maintain an equality of temper, even in acute pains and loss of children or tedious sickness. His practice was an excellent instance that a man may be forcible and yet unbend his humor as occasion requires. The heaviness and impertinence of his scholars could seldom rouse his ill temper. As for his learning and the peculiar happiness of his manner in teaching, he was so far from being proud of himself upon this score that one might easily perceive he thought it one of the least things which belonged to him. This great man let me into the true secret of receiving an obligation, without either lessening myself or seeming ungrateful to my friend. 9. The philosopher Sextus recommended good humor to me and showed me the pattern of a household governed in a fatherly manner. He also bade him make nature and reason my rule to live by. By his precedent, I was instructed to appear with an unaffected gravity, to study the temper and circumstances of my friends in order to oblige them. I saw him bearing with the ignorant and undiscerning, compliant and obliging to all people, so that his conversation was more charming than flattery, and yet at the same time he was held in the highest reverence by others. Conversing with this philosopher helped me to draw up a true, intelligible, and methodical scheme for life and manners, and never so much as to show the least sign of anger or any other disturbing thought, but to be perfectly calm and indifferent, yet tender-hearted. However, he let me see in himself that a man might show his good, will significantly enough, without noise and display, and likewise possess great knowledge without vanity and ostentation. 10. Alexander the grammarian taught me not to be ruggedly critical about words, nor find fault with people for improprieties of phrase or pronunciation, but to set them right by speaking the thing properly myself, and that either by way of answer, assent, or inquiry, or by some such other indirect and suitable correction. 11. Fronto taught me that envy, tricking, and dissimulation are the character and consequences of tyranny, and that those we call patricians have commonly not much fatherly feeling in them. 12. Alexander the Platonist advised me that without necessity I should never say to anyone, nor write in a letter, that I am not at leisure, nor make business an excuse to decline frequently the offices of humanity to those we dwell with. 13. I learned of Catullus not to slight a friend for making a remonstrance, though it should happen to be unreasonable, but rather to endeavor to restore him to his natural humor. That, like Domitius and Athenodotus, I should always speak well of those who had the care of my education, and that I should always preserve an hearty affection for my children. 14. I am indebted to Severus for the love I bear to my relations, and towards justice and truth. He likewise made me acquainted with the character and sentiments of Cato, Brutus, Thrasea, Helvidius, and Dio, and gave me the idea of an equal commonwealth, with equal rights and equal speech, and also of a monarchy, where the liberty of the subject was principally regarded. To mention some more of my obligations to him, it was of him I learned not to grow wise by starts and sudden fancies, but to be a constant admirer of philosophy and improvement, that a man ought to be generous and obliging, hope the best of matters, and never question the affection of his friends, to be free in showing a reasonable dislike of another, and no less clear in his own expectations and desires, and not to put his friends to the trouble of divining what he would be at. 15. I learned from Maximus to command myself and not to be too much drawn towards anything, to be full of spirits under sickness and misfortune, to appear with modesty, obligingness, and dignity of behavior, to turn off business smoothly as it arises, without drudging and complaint. Whatever he did, all men believed him, that as he spoke, so he thought, and whatever he did, that he did with a good intent. He attained that greatness of mind, not to wonder or start at anything, neither to hurry an enterprise nor sleep over it, never to be puzzled or dejected, nor to put on an appearance of friendliness, not to be angry or suspicious, but ever ready to do good, and to forgive and speak truth. And all this as one who seemed rather of himself to be straight and right than ever to have been rectified. Nobody ever could fancy they were slighted by him, or dared to think themselves his betters. Besides all this, he had an agreeable wit. 16. In my adoptive father I observed a smooth and inoffensive temper, with great steadiness in keeping close to measures judiciously taken, a greatness proof against vanity and the impressions of pomp and power. From him, a prince might learn to love business and action, and be constantly at it, to be willing to hear out any proposal relating to public advantage, and undeviatingly give every man his due, to understand the critical seasons and circumstances for rigor or remissness, to have no boy favorites, not to stand upon points of state and prerogative, but to leave his nobility at perfect liberty in their visits and attendance. And when he was upon his progress, no man lost his favor for not being at leisure to follow the court. To debate matters nicely and thoroughly at the council board, and then to stand by what was resolved on, yet not hastily to give up the inquiry, as one easily satisfied with sudden notions and apprehensions. To be constant to a friend, without tiring or fondness. To be always satisfied and cheerful. To reach forward into the future and manage accordingly. Not to neglect the least concerns, but all without hurry or being embarrassed. Farther, by observing his methods and administration, I had the opportunity of learning how much it was the part of a prince to check the excesses of panegyric and flattery, to have his magazines and exchequer well furnished, to be frugal in his expenses without minding being lampooned for his pains, not to worship the gods to superstition, not to court the populace, either by prodigality or compliment, but rather to be sober and firm upon all occasions, keeping things in a steady decorum, without chopping and changing of measures. To enjoy the plenty and magnificence of a sovereign fortune without bragging, and yet without making excuse, so as freely to enjoy them when present, but when wanting, not to be mortified at the loss of them, and to behave himself so that no man could charge him with sophistry, or buffooning, or being a pedant. No, he was a person mature and perfect, scorning flattery, and thoroughly qualified to govern himself and others. As for those that were philosophers in earnest, he had a great regard for them, but without reproaching those who were otherwise, nor yet being led away by these. He was condescending and familiar in conversation, and pleasant too, but not to tiresomeness and excess. As for his health, he was not anxious about it, like one fond of living or overstudious of bodily appearance, and yet managed his constitution with that care as seldom to stand in need of the assistance of physi or outward applications. Farther, he never envied and browbeat those that were eminent in any faculty or science, as eloquence or knowledge of the laws or morals, but on the contrary, encouraged them in their ways and promoted their reputation. He observed fitness and custom in all his actions, and yet did not seem to regard them. He was not fickle and fluttering in his humor, but constant both to place and undertaking, and I have seen him, after violent fits of the headache, return fresh and vigorous to his usual business. He kept but few things to himself, and those were secrets of government. He was very moderate and frugal in shows, public buildings, liberalities, and such like, being one that did not so much regard the popularity as the rightness of an action. It was none of his custom to bathe at unusual hours, or to be overcome with the fancy of building, to study eating and luxury, to value the curiosity of his clothes, or the shape and person of his servants. His cloak came from Laurium, his villa on the coast. At Lanuvium, he wore for the most part only a tunic. And at Tusculum, he would scarcely so much as put on a cloak without making an excuse for it. To take him altogether, There was nothing of ruggedness, immodesty, or eagerness in his temper. Neither did he ever seem to drudge and sweat at the helm. Things were dispatched at leisure and without being felt, and yet the administration was carried on without confusion, with great order, force, and uniformity. Upon the whole, what was told of Socrates is applicable to him, for he was so much master of himself that he could either take or leave those conveniences of life with respect to which most people are either uneasy without them or intemperate with them. Now, to hold on with fortitude in one condition and sobriety in the other is a proof of a great soul and an impregnable virtue, such as he showed in the sickness of Maximus. 17. I have to thank the gods that my grandfathers, parents, sister, preceptors, relations, friends, and domestics were almost all of them persons of probity, and that I never happened to disoblige or misbehave myself towards any of them, notwithstanding that my disposition was such that, had occasion offered, I might have acted thus. But by the goodness of the gods, I met with no provocations to reveal my infirmities. It is likewise by their providence that my childhood was no longer managed by my grandfather's mistress, that I preserved the flower of my youth, that I was subject to the emperor my father, and bred under him, who was the most proper person living to put me out of conceit with pride, and to convince me that it is possible to live in a palace without the ceremony of guards, without richness and distinction of habit, without torches, statues, or such other marks of royalty and state, and that a prince may shrink himself almost into the figure of a private gentleman, and yet act, nevertheless, with all the force and majesty of his character when the common weal requires it. It is the favor of the gods that I happen to meet with a brother, whose behavior and affection is such as to contribute both to my pleasure and improvement. It is also their blessing that my children were neither stupid nor misshapen, that I made no farther advances in rhetoric, poetry, and such other amusements, which possibly might have engaged my fancy too far, had I found myself a considerable proficient. That, without asking, I gave my governors that share of honor which they seemed to desire, and did not put them off from time to time with promises and excuses, because they were yet but young. That I had the happiness of being acquainted with Apollonius, Rusticus, and Maximus, that I have a clear idea of the life in accordance with nature, and the impression frequently refreshed, so that, considering the extraordinary assistance and directions of the gods, it is impossible for me to miss the road of nature unless, by refusing to be guided by the dictates and almost sensible inspirations of heaven. It is by their favor that my constitution has held out so well under a life of fatigue and business, that I never had to do with Benedicta or Theodotus, and when I fell into some fits of love, I was soon cured. That when I fell out with Rusticus, as it frequently happened, I was not transported into any act of violence, that I had the satisfaction of my mother's life and company a considerable while, though she was destined to die young. That when I was willing to relieve the necessities of others, I was never told that the exchequer was empty. And, again, it is they that kept me from standing in need of any man's fortune. Farther, it is from them that my wife is so very obedient and affectionate, and so remote from luxury, that I had choice of good governors for my children, that remedies were prescribed me in a dream against giddiness and spitting of blood, as at Cajeta, by an ointment, that when I had a mind to look into philosophy, I did not meet with a sophist to instruct me, that I did not spend too much time in reading history, chopping logic, or considering the heavens. Now all these points could never have been compassed without a protection from above, and the gods presiding over fate. This was written in the country of the Quadi, at the Granua. Emember to put yourself in mind every morning, that before night it will be your luck to meet with some busybody, with some ungrateful, abusive fellow, with some knavish, envious, or unsociable churl or other. Now all this perverseness in them proceeds from their ignorance of good and evil. And since it has fallen to my share to understand the natural beauty of a good action, and the deformity of an ill one, since I am satisfied the person disobliging is of kin to me, and though we are not just of the same flesh and blood, yet our minds are nearly related, being both extracted from the deity. I am likewise convinced that no man can do me a real injury, because no man can force me to misbehave myself. Nor can I find it in my heart to hate or to be angry with one of my own nature and family. For we are all made for mutual assistance, as the feet, the hands, and the eyelids, as the rows of the upper and under teeth, from whence it follows that clashing and opposition is perfectly unnatural. Now such an unfriendly disposition is implied in resentment and aversion. To this being of mine, all there is of it, consists of flesh, breath, and the ruling part. Away with your books then. Suffer not your mind any more to be distracted. It is not permitted. As for your body, value it no more than if you were just expiring. For what is it? Nothing but a little blood and bones, a piece of network wrought out of nerves, veins, and arteries twisted together. In the next place, consider what sort of thing your breath is. Why, only a little air, and that not constant, but every moment let out of your lungs and sucked in again. The third part of your composition is the ruling part. Now consider thus: you are an old man. Do not suffer this noble part of you under servitude any longer. Let it not be moved by the springs of selfish passions. Let it not quarrel with fate, be uneasy at the present, or afraid of the future. 3. Providence shines clearly through the works of the gods. Even the works of chance are not without dependence on nature, being only an effect of that chain of causes which are under a providential regulation. Indeed, all things flow from this fountain. Besides, there is necessity and the interest of the whole universe, of which you are a part. Now, that which is both the product and support of universal nature must by consequence be serviceable to every part of it. But the world subsists upon change and is preserved by the mutation of the simple elements and also of things mixed and compounded, and what it loses one way it gets another. Let these reflections satisfy you and make them your rule to live by. As for books, cast away your thirst after them, that you may not die complaining, but go off in good humor, and heartily thank the gods for what you have had. 4. Remember how often you have postponed mindy ng your interest, and let slip those opportunities the gods have given you. It is now high time to consider what sort of world you are part of, and from what kind of governor of it you are descended, that you have a set period assigned you to act in, and unless you improve it to brighten and compose your thoughts, it will quickly run off with you, and be lost beyond recovery. 5. Take care always to remember that you are a man and a Roman, and let every action be done with perfect and unaffected gravity, humanity, freedom, and justice. And be sure you entertain no fancies, which may give check to these qualities. This is possible if you will but perform every action as though it were your last, if your appetites and passions do not cross upon your reason, if you keep clear of rashness, and have nothing of insincerity and self-love to infect you, and do not complain of your destiny. You see what a few points a man has to gain in order to attain to a godlike way of living, for he that comes thus far performs all which the immortal powers will require of him. 6. Continue to dishonor yourself, my soul, neither will you have much time left to do yourself honor. For the life of each man is almost up already, and yet, instead of paying a due regard to yourself, you place your happiness in the souls of other men. 7. Do not let accidents disturb or outward objects engross your thoughts, but keep your mind quiet and disengaged, that you may be at leisure to learn something good, and cease rambling from one thing to another. There is likewise another sort of roving to be avoided, for some people are busy and yet do nothing. They fatigue and wear themselves out, and yet aim at no goal, nor propose any general end of action or design. 8. A man can rarely be unhappy by being ignorant of another's thoughts, but he that does not attend to the motions of his own is certainly unhappy. 9. These reflections ought always to be at hand, to consider well the nature of the universe and my own nature, together with the relation betwixt them, and what kind of part it is, of what kind of whole, and that no mortal can hinder me from acting and speaking conformably to the being of which I am a part. 10. Theophrastus, in comparing the degrees of faults, as men would commonly distinguish them, talks like a philosopher when he affirms that those instances of misbehavior which proceed from desire are greater than those of which anger is the occasion. For a man that is angry seems to quit his hold of reason unwillingly and with pain, and start out of rule before he is aware. But he that runs riot out of desire, being overcome by pleasure, loses all hold on himself and all manly restraint. Well then, and like a philosopher, he said that he of the two is the more to be condemned that sins with pleasure than he that sins with grief. For the first looks like an injured person and is vexed and, as it were, forced into a passion, whereas the other begins with inclination and commits the fault through desire. 11. Manage all your actions, words, and thoughts accordingly, since you may at any moment quit life. And what great matter is the business of dying? If the gods are in being, you can suffer nothing, for they will do you no harm. And if they are not, or take no care of us mortals, why then, a world without either gods or providence is not worth a man's while to live in. But in truth, the being of the gods and their concern in human affairs is beyond dispute. And they have put it entirely in a man's power not to fall into any calamity properly so called. And if other misfortunes had been really evils, they would have provided against them too, and furnished man with capacity to avoid them. But how can that which cannot make the man worse make his life so? I can never be persuaded that the universal nature neglected these matters through want of knowledge, or, having that, yet lacked the power to prevent or correct the error, or that nature should commit such a fault, through want of power or skill, as to suffer things, really good and evil, to happen promiscuously to good and bad men. Now, living and dying, honor and infamy, pleasure and pain, riches and poverty, all these things are the common allotment of the virtuous and vicious, because they have nothing intrinsically noble or base in their nature, and therefore, to speak properly, are neither good nor bad. 12. Consider how quickly all things are dissolved and resolved, the bodies and substances themselves into the matter and substance of the world, and their memories into its general age and time. Consider, too, the objects of sense, particularly those which charm us with pleasure, frighten us with pain, or are most admired for empty reputation. The power of thought will show a man how insignificant, despicable, and paltry these things are, and how soon they wither and die. It will show him what those people are upon whose fancy and good word the being of fame depends, also the nature of death, which, if once abstracted from the pomp and terror of the idea, will be found nothing more than a pure natural action. Now he that dreads the course of nature is a very child, but this is not only a work of nature, but is also profitable to her. Lastly, we should consider how we are related to the deity, and in what part of our being, and in what condition of that part. 13. Nothing can be more unhappy than the curiosity of that man that ranges everywhere, and digs into the earth, as the poet says, for discovery. That is wonderfully busy to force by conjecture a passage into other people's thoughts, but does not consider that it is sufficient to reverence and serve the divinity within himself. And this service consists in this, that a man keep himself pure from all violent passion, and evil affection, from all rashness and vanity, and from all manner of discontent towards gods or men. For as for the gods, their administration ought to be revered upon the score of excellency. And as for men, their actions should be well taken for the sake of common kindred. Besides, they are often to be pitied for their ignorance of good and evil, which incapacity of discerning between moral qualities is no less a defect than that of a blind man, who cannot distinguish between white and black. 14. Though you were to live 3,000, or, if you please, 30,000 of years, yet remember that no man can lose any other life than that which he now lives, neither is he possessed of any other than that which he loses. Whence it follows that the longest life, as we commonly speak, and the shortest, come all to the same reckoning. For the present is of the same duration everywhere. Everybody's loss, therefore, is of the same bigness, and reaches no further than to a point of time, for no man is capable of losing either the past or the future, for how can one be deprived of what he has not? So that under this consideration there are two notions worth remembering. One is, that nature treads in a circle, and has much the same face through the whole course of eternity, and therefore it signifies not at all whether a man stands gazing here 100, or 200, or an infinity of years. For all that he gets by it is only to see the same sights so much the oftener. The other hint is, that when the longest and shortest lived persons come to die, their loss is equal. They can but lose the present as being the only thing they have, for that which he has not, no man can be truly said to lose. 15. Monimus, the Cynic philosopher, used to say that all things were but opinion. Now this saying may undoubtedly prove serviceable, provided one accepts it only as far as it is true. 16. There are several different ways by which a man's soul may do violence to itself. First of all, when it becomes an abscess, and, as it were, an excrescence on the universe, as far as in it lies. For to be vexed at anything that happens is a separation of ourselves from nature, in some part of which the natures of all other things are contained. Secondly, it falls under the same misfortune when it hates any person, or goes against him, with an intention of mischief, which is the case of the angry and revengeful. Thirdly, it wrongs itself when it is overcome by pleasure or pain. Fourthly, when it makes use of art, tricking, and falsehood in word or action. Fifthly, when it does not know what it would be at in a business, but runs on without thought or design, whereas even the least undertaking ought to be aimed at some end. Now the end of rational beings is to be governed by the law and reason of the most venerable city and constitution. 17. The extent of human life is but a point. Its substance is in perpetual flux, its perceptions dim, and the whole composition of the body tending to corruption. The soul is but a whirl, fortune not to be guessed at, and fame undiscerning. In a word, that which belongs to the body is a flowing river, and what the soul has is but dream and bubble. Life is but a campaign or course of travels, and after fame is oblivion. What is it, then, that will stick by a man? Why, nothing but philosophy. Now, this consists in keeping the divinity within us from injury and disgrace, superior to pleasure and pain, doing nothing at random, without any dissembling and pretense, and independent of the motions of another. Farther, philosophy brings the mind to take things as they fall, and acquiesce in their distribution, inasmuch as all events proceed from the same cause with itself, and, above all, to have an easy prospect of death, as being nothing more than a dissolving of the elements of which each thing is composed. Now, if the elements themselves are never the worse for running off one into another, what if they should all change and be dissolved? Why should any man be concerned at the consequence? All this is but nature's method. Now, nature never does any mischief. Written at Carnuntum.
Image summary. This is an image of a decorative letter. The image shows the letter T, adorned with figures. The letter is used at the beginning of a paragraph in a book. Image summary. This is an image. The image appears to be a blank page. There is no discernible content or detail visible in the image. Image summary. This is a decorative image with a repeating pattern of floral or abstract shapes arranged horizontally. The pattern is used as a border above and below the text, Book II, which is centered on the image. Image summary. This is an image of a decorative border above and below the words Book II. The border appears to be a repeating pattern of small floral or leaf-like designs. The image is likely a page divider or title page for a book. Image summary. The image is a photograph of a blank page. The page appears aged and discolored. There are no markings or content visible on the page. Image summary. The image shows a decorative initial letter R at the beginning of a block of text. The text discusses dealing with difficult people and understanding the nature of good and evil. It suggests that negative behavior stems from ignorance and emphasizes the importance of mutual assistance and avoiding resentment. Image summary. This is an image of a blank page. The page appears to be aged, with a discolored hue. There is minimal visible content on the page. Image summary. The image shows a page from a book. The page has a decorative border at the top and bottom. The words Book III are printed in the center of the page.
Book III.
Image summary. The image shows a decorative border at the top and bottom with the text Book III in the center. The border consists of a repeating floral or foliate pattern. The layout suggests a title page or section divider within a book. Image summary. The image is a blank page. There is nothing of note in the image.
Book III. E ought not only to remember that life is wearing off, and a smaller part of it is left daily, but also to consider that if a man's life should happen to be longer than ordinary, yet it is uncertain whether his mind will keep pace with his years, and afford him sense enough for business, and power to contemplate things human and divine. For if the man begins to dote, it is true the mere animal life goes on. He may breathe and be nourished, and be furnished with imagination and appetite, but to make any proper use of himself, to fill up the measure of his duty, to distinguish appearances, and to know whether it is time for him to walk out of the world or not. As to all such noble functions of reason and judgment, the man is perfectly dead already. It concerns us, therefore, to push forward and make the most of our matters, for death is continually advancing. And besides that, our understanding sometimes dies before us. 2. It is worth while to observe that the least thing that happens naturally to things natural has something in itself that is pleasing and delightful. Thus, for example, there are cracks and little breaks on the surface of a loaf, which, though never intended by the baker, have a sort of agreeableness in them, which invites the appetite. Thus figs, when they are most ripe, open and gape, and olives, when they fall of themselves and are near decaying, are particularly pretty to look at. The bending of an ear of corn, the brow of a lion, the foam of a boar, and many other things, if you take them singly, are far enough from being beautiful. But when they are looked on as effects of the products of nature, help to adorn and attract. Thus, if a man has but inclination and thought enough to examine the product of the universe, he will find the most unpromising appearances in the results of nature, not without charm, and that the more remote appendages have somewhat to recommend them. One thus prepared will be no less pleased to see the gaping jaws of living beasts than the imitations of painters and sculptors, and with chastened eyes he will find beauty in the ripeness of age as well as in the blossom of youth. I grant many of these things will not charm everyone, but only those who are truly in harmony with nature and her works. 3. Hippocrates, who cured so many diseases, himself fell ill and died. The Chaldeans, who foretold other people's death, at last met with their own fate. Alexander, Pompey, and Julius Caesar, who had destroyed so many towns and cut off so many thousands of horse and foot in the field, were forced at last to march off themselves. Heraclitus, who argued so much about the universal conflagration, died through water by a dropsy. Democritus was eaten up with vermin. Another sort of vermin destroyed Socrates. What are these instances for? Look you have embarked, you have made your voyage and your port. Embark then without more ado. If you happen to land upon another world, there will be gods enough to take care of you. But if it be your fortune to drop into nothing, why, then you will be no more solicited with pleasure and pain. Then you will have done drudging for your outer covering, which is the more unworthy in proportion as that which serves it is worthy. For the one is all soul, intelligence, and divinity, whereas the other is but dirt and corruption. For the future, do not spend your thoughts upon other people, unless you are led to it by common interest. For the prying into foreign business, that is, musing upon the talk, fancies, and contrivances of another, and guessing at the what and why of his actions, does but make a man forget himself and ramble from his own guiding principle. He ought, therefore, not to work his mind to no purpose, nor throw a superfluous link into the chain of thought, and more especially to avoid curiosity and malice in his inquiry. Accustom yourself, therefore, to think upon nothing but what you could freely reveal, if the question were put to you, so that if your soul were thus laid open, there would nothing appear but what was sincere, good-natured, and public-spirited, not so much as one voluptuous or luxurious fancy, nothing of hatred, envy, or unreasonable suspicion, nor aught else which you could not bring to the light without blushing. A man thus qualified, who does not delay to assume the first rank among mortals, is a sort of priest and minister of the gods, and makes a right use of the deity within him. By the assistance thereof, he is preserved, uninfected with pleasure, invulnerable against pain, out of the reach of injury, and above the malice of evil people. Thus he wrestles in the noblest fight, to hold his own against all his passions, and penetrated with the spirit of justice, welcomes with his whole heart all that happens and is allotted to him. He never minds other people's speech, thoughts, or actions, unless public necessity and general good require it. No, he keeps himself to his own business, and contemplates that portion of the whole allotted him by the fates, and endeavors to do the first as it should be, and believes that his lot is good. For every man's fate is suitable, since it is suited to him. He considers that the rational principle is akin in all men, and that general kindness and concern for the whole world is no more than a piece of human nature, that not everyone's good opinion is not worth the gaining, but only that of those who seek to live in accordance with nature. As for others, he knows their way of living, both at home and abroad, by day and by night, and their companions in their evil way of life, and he bears it in mind. And why indeed should he value the commendation of such people, who are not able even to please themselves? 5. Be not unwilling, selfish, unadvised, or passionate in anything you do. Do not affect quaintness and points of wit, neither talk nor meddle more than is necessary. Take care that the divinity within you has a creditable charge to preside over, that you appear in the character of your sex and age. Act like a Roman emperor that loves his country, and be always in a readiness to quit the field at the first summons, and ere you claim your discharge, manage your credit so that you need neither swear yourself nor want a voucher. Let your air be cheerful, depend not upon external supports, nor beg your tranquility of another. And in a word, never throw away your legs to stand upon crutches. 6. If in the whole compass of human life you find anything preferable to justice and truth, to temperance and fortitude, to a mind self-satisfied with its own rational conduct and entirely resigned to fate, if I say you know anything better than this, turn to it with your whole soul and enjoy it, accounting it the best. But if there is nothing more valuable than the divinity implanted within you, and this is master of its appetites, examines all impressions, and has detached itself from the senses, as Socrates used to say, and shows itself submissive to the government of the gods, and helpful and benevolent to mankind. If all things are trifles compared with this, give way to nothing else. For if you are once inclined to any such thing, it will no longer be in your power to give your undivided preference to what is your own peculiar good. For it is not lawful that anything of another kind or nature, as either popular applause, or power, or riches, or pleasures, should be suffered to contest with what is rationally and politically good. All these things, if but for a while they begin to please, presently prevail and pervert a man's mind. Let your choice therefore run all one way, and be bold and resolute for that which is best. Now what is profitable is best. If that means profitable to man as he is a rational being, stand to it, but if it means profitable to him as a mere animal, reject it and keep your judgment without arrogance. Only take care to make inquiry secure. 7. Think nothing for your interest which makes you break your word. Quit your modesty, hate, suspect, or curse any person, or inclines you to any practice which will not bear the light and look the world in the face. For he that values his mind and the worship of his divinity before all other things, need act no tragic part, laments under no misfortune, and wants neither solitude nor company. And, which is still more, he will neither fly from life nor pursue it, but is perfectly indifferent about the length or shortness of the time in which his soul shall be encompassed by his body. And if he were to expire this moment, he is as ready for it as for any other action that may be performed with modesty and decency. For all his life long, this is his only care, that his mind may always be occupied as befits a rational and social creature. 8. If you examine a man that has been well disciplined and purified by philosophy, you will find nothing that is unsound, foul, or false in him. Death can never surprise his life as imperfect, so that nobody can say he goes off the stage before his part is quite played. Besides, there is in him nothing servile or affected. He neither attaches himself too closely to others, nor keeps aloof from them. He is neither responsible to them, nor does he avoid them. 9. Hold in honor your opinionative faculty, for this alone is able to prevent any opinion from originating in your guiding principle that is contrary to nature or the proper constitution of a rational creature. Now a rational constitution enjoins us to do nothing rashly, and to be kindly disposed towards men, and to submit willingly to the gods. 10. As for other speculations, throw them all out of your head, excepting those few precepts above mentioned, remembering withal that every man's life lies all within the present, which is but a point of time, for the past is spent, and the future is uncertain. Life moves in a very narrow compass. Yes, and men live in a small corner of the world too. And the most lasting fame will stretch but to a sorry extent, for, alas, poor transitory mortals who hand it down no little even of themselves, much less of those who died long before their time. 11. To the foregoing hints you may add this which follows. Make for yourself a particular description and definition of every object that presents itself to your mind, that you may thoroughly contemplate it in its own nature, bare and naked, wholly and separately. And in your own mind call itself and the parts of which it is composed, and into which it will be resolved, by its own and proper name. For nothing is so likely to raise the mind to a pitch of greatness as the power truly and methodically to examine and consider all things that happen in this life, and so to penetrate into their natures as to apprehend at once what sort of purpose each thing serves, and what sort of universe makes use of it, what value it bears to the whole, and what to man, who is a citizen of that great capital, in respect of which all other towns are no more than single families. What is this object which makes an impression on me? How long can it last? What virtue does it require of me? Is it good nature, fortitude, truth, simplicity, self-sufficiency, or any of the rest? On each occasion a man should be ready to pronounce, "This was sent me by heaven, this by destiny, or the combinations of fate, or by one of the same clan, or family, or company as myself, who knows not what is natural for him. But I do know. Therefore I am just and friendly to him, and treat him according to the natural laws of our communion. However, in things indifferent I take care to rate them according to their respective value. 12. If you will be governed by reason, and manage what lies before you with industry, vigor, and temper. If you will not run out after new distraction, but keep your divinity pure, even as though you must at once render it up again, your mind staunch and well disciplined, as if this trial of behavior were your last. And if you will but cleave to this and be true to the best of yourself, fearing and desiring nothing, but living up to your nature, standing boldly by the truth of your word, and satisfied therewith, then you will be a happy man. But the whole world cannot hinder you from so doing. 13. As surgeons always have their instruments and knives ready for sudden occasions, so be you always furnished with rules and principles to let you into the knowledge of things human and divine, remembering even in your slightest action the connection these two have with each other. For without a regard for things divine, you will fail in your behavior towards men. And again, the reasoning holds for the other side of the argument. 14. Wander at random no longer. Alas, you have no time left to peruse your diary, to read over the Greek and Roman history, or so much as your own commonplace book, which you collected to serve you when you were old. Hasten then towards the goal. Do not flatter and deceive yourself. Come to your own aid while yet you may, if you have a kindness for yourself. 15. Men do not know in how many senses they can take the words to steal, to buy, to sow, to be quiet, to see what should be done, for this is not affected by eyes but by another kind of vision. 16. There are three things which belong to a man: body, soul, and mind. Sensation belongs to the body, impulse to the soul, and reason to the mind. To have the senses stamped with the impression of an object is common to brutes and cattle. To be hurried and convulsed with passion is the quality of beasts of prey and men of pleasure, such as Phalaris and Nero, of atheists and traitors, too, and of those who do not care what they do when no man sees them. Now, since these qualities are common, let us find out the mark of a man of probity. His distinction, then, lies in letting reason guide his practice, in contentment with all that is allotted him, keeping pure the divinity within him, untroubled by a crowd of appearances, preserving it tranquil, and obeying it as a god. He is all truth in his words and justice in his actions. And if the whole world should disbelieve his integrity, dispute his character, and question his happiness, he would neither take it ill in the least, nor turn aside from that path that leads to the aim of life, towards which he must move pure, calm, well prepared, and with perfect resignation in his fate.
Figure 1 summary. This is an image of an ornamented initial letter. The image shows the letter W decorated with figures and foliage. The image serves as a decorative element, likely at the beginning of a chapter or section of text.
Book IV.
Image summary. The image shows a blank page. It seems to be a page from a book. There is no text or figures on the page.
Book IV. Hen the mind acts up to nature, she is rightly disposed, and takes things as they come, and tacks about with her circumstances. As for fixing the condition of her activity, she is not at all solicitous about that. It is true, she is not perfectly indifferent. She moves forward with a preference in her choice, but if anything comes cross, she falls to work upon it, and like fire converts it into fuel. For like this element, when it is weak, it is easily put out, but when once well kindled it seizes upon what is heaped upon it, subdues it into its own nature, and increases by resistance. 2. Let every action tend to some point, and be perfect in its kind. 3. It is the custom of people to go to unfrequented places and country places, and the seashore and the mountains for retirement, and this you often earnestly desired. But after all, this is but a vulgar fancy, for it is in your power to withdraw into yourself whenever you desire. Now one's own mind is a place the most free from crowd and noise in the world, if a man's thoughts are such as to ensure him perfect tranquility within, and this tranquility consists in the good ordering of the mind. Your way is, therefore, to make frequent use of this retirement and refresh your virtue in it. And to this end, be always provided with a few short, uncontested notions to keep your understanding true and send you back content with the business to which you return. For instance, what is it that troubles you? It is the wickedness of the world. If this be your case, out with your antidote, and consider that rational beings were made for mutual advantage, that forbearance is one part of justice, and that people misbehave themselves against their will. Consider likewise how many men have embroiled themselves and spent their days in disputes, suspicion, and animosities, and now they are dead and burnt to ashes. Be quiet then and disturb yourself no more. But it may be, the distribution of the world does not please you. Recall the alternative and argue thus: either providence or atoms rule the universe. Besides, you may recall the proofs that the world is, as it were, one great city and corporation. But possibly the ill state of your health afflicts you. Pray reflect, your intellect is not affected by the roughness or smoothness of the currents of sensation, if she will retire and take a view of her own privilege and power. And when she has done this, recollect the philosophy about pleasure and pain, to which you have even now listened and assented. Well, it may be the concern of fame sits hard upon you. If you are pinched here, consider how quickly all things vanish and are forgotten, what an immense chaos there stands on either side of eternity. Applause. Consider the emptiness of the sound, the precarious tenure, the little judgment of those that give it us, and the narrow compass it is confined to. For the whole globe is but a point. And of this little, how small is your habitation, and how insignificant the number and quality of your admirers. Upon the whole, do not forget to retire into the little realm of your own. And, above all things, let there be no straining nor struggling in the case, but move freely and contemplate matters like a human being, a citizen, and a mortal. And among the rest of your stock, let these two maxims be always ready. First, that things cannot disturb the soul, but remain motionless without, while disturbance springs from the opinion within the soul. The second is, to consider that the scene is just shifting and sliding off into nothing, and that you yourself have seen abundance of great alterations. In a word, the world is all transformation, and life is opinion. 4. If the faculty of understanding lies in common amongst us all, then reason, the cause of it, must be common too, and that other reason too which governs practice by commands and prohibitions. From whence we may conclude that mankind are under one common law. And if so, they must be fellow citizens and belong to some body politic. From whence it will follow that the whole world is but one commonwealth. For certainly there is no other society in which mankind can be incorporated. Now this common fund of understanding, reason, and law is a commodity of this same country, or which way do mortals light on it? For as the four distinctions in my body belong to some general head and species of matter. For instance, the earthy part in me comes from the division of earth. The watery belongs to another element. The airy particles flow from a third spring, and those of fire from one distinct from all the former, for nothing can no more produce something than something can sink into nothing. Thus it is evident that our understanding must proceed from some source or other. 5. Death and generation are both mysteries of nature, and somewhat resemble each other. For the first does but dissolve those elements the latter had combined. Now there is nothing that a man need be ashamed of in all this, nothing that is opposed to his nature as a rational being and to the design of his constitution. 6. Practices and dispositions are generally of a piece. Such usage from such sort of men is in a manner necessary. To be surprised at it is in effect to wonder that the fig tree yields juice. Pray consider that both you and your enemy are dropping off, and that ere long your very memories will be extinguished. 7. Do not suppose you are hurt, and your complaint ceases. Cease your complaint, and you are not hurt. 8. That which does not make a man worse does not make his life worse, and by consequence he has no harm either within or without. 9. The nature of the general good was obliged to act in this manner. 10. Take notice that all events turn out justly, and that if you observe nicely, you will not only perceive a connection between causes and effects, but a sovereign distribution of justice, which presides in the administration and gives everything its due. Observe, then, as you have begun, and let all your actions answer the character of a good man. I mean a good man in the strictness and notion of philosophy. 11. If a man affronts you, do not accept his opinion or think just as he would have you do. No, look upon things as reality presents them. 12. Be always provided with principles for these two purposes. First, to engage in nothing but what reason dictates, what the sovereign and legislative part of you shall suggest, for the interest of mankind. Secondly, to be disposed to quit your opinion and alter your measures when a friend shall give you good grounds for so doing. But then the reasons of changing your mind ought to be drawn from some consideration regarding justice and public good, or some such generous motive, and not because it pleases your fancy or promotes your reputation. 13. Have you any sense in your head? Yes, why do you not make use of it then? For if this faculty does but do its part, I cannot see what more you need wish for. 14. At present your nature is distinct, but ere long you will vanish into the whole. Or, rather, you will be returned into that universal reason which gave you your being. 15. When frankincense is thrown upon the altar, one grain usually falls before another, but it makes no difference. 16. Do but return to the principles of wisdom, and those who take you now for a monkey or a wild beast will make a god of you in a week's time. 17. Do not act as if you had 10,000 years to throw away. Death stands at your elbow. Be good for something while you live and it is in your power. 18. What a great deal of time and ease that man gains who lets his neighbor's words, thoughts, and behavior alone, confines his inspections to himself, and takes care that his own actions are honest and righteous. Truly, as Agathon observes, we should not wander thus, but run straight to the goal without rambling and impertinence. 19. He that is so very solicitous about being talked of when he is dead, and makes his memory his inclination, does not consider that all who knew him will quickly be gone, that his fame will grow less in the next generation, and flag upon the course, and handed from one to another by men who eagerly desire it themselves, and are quenched themselves, it will be quenched at last. But granting your memory and your men immortal, what is their panegyric to you? I do not say when you are dead, but if you were living, what would commendation signify, unless for some reason of utility? To conclude, if you depend thus servilely upon the good word of other people, you will be unworthy of your nature. 20. Whatever is good has that quality from itself. It is finished by its own nature, and commendation is no part of it. Why, then, a thing is neither better nor worse for being praised. This holds concerning things which are called good in the common way of speaking, as the products of nature and art. What do you think, then, of that which deserves this character in the strictest propriety? It wants nothing foreign to complete the idea any more than law, truth, good nature, and sobriety. Do any of these virtues stand in need of a good word, or are they the worse for a bad one? I hope an emerald will shine nevertheless for a man's being silent about the worth of it. Neither is there any necessity of praising gold, ivory, purple, a lyre, a dagger, a little flower, or a shrub. 21. If human souls have a being after death, which way has the air made room for them from all eternity? Pray, how has the earth been capacious enough to receive all the bodies buried in it? The resolution of this latter question will satisfy the former. For as a corpse after some continuance by change and dissolution makes way for another, so when a man dies, and the spirit is let loose into the air, it holds out for some time, after which it is changed, diffused, and kindled in flame, or else absorbed into the generative principle of the universe. And thus they make room for succession. And this may serve for an answer upon the supposition of the souls surviving the body. Besides, we are not only to consider the vast number of bodies disposed of in the manner above mentioned, but what an infinite number are every day devoured by mankind and other living creatures, and as it were buried in their bodies. And yet by the transmutation of the food into blood or into fire and air, there is space enough. And now which way can a man investigate the truth? Why, in order to this, he must divide the thing in question into the causal and material elements. 22. Do not run riot, keep your intentions honest and your convictions sure. 23. Whatever is agreeable to you, O universe, is so to me too. Nothing is early or late for me that is seasonable for you. Everything is fruit for me which your seasons bring, O nature. From you all things proceed, subsist in you, and return to you. And if the poet said, Dear city of Cecrops, may we not also say, Dear city of God? 24. If you would live at your ease, says Democritus, manage but a few things. I think it had been better if he had said, Do nothing but what is necessary, and what becomes the reason of a social being, and in the order too it prescribes it. For by this rule a man has the double pleasure of making his actions good and few into the bargain.